Good?
Good.
Okay.
It's a good.
So, medical aspects of the Navajo forced relocation. This is actually the second Navajo forced relocation. Forced relocation being a pretty big element in Navajo health. The forced relocation I'm going to look at today from a medical standpoint. It has some major political and legal elements, but I thought we'd focus on the forced relocation as a pathogen, as a pathogenic force. The forced relocation is now considered internationally as a human rights abuse, as an obvious human rights abuse. There's not a legitimate forced relocation. Its definition is action by a central government to relocate people against their will from a place that they have been inhabiting and feel that they own. And the two Navajo relocations illustrate all the elements of the international problem of forced relocation. In current global affairs, forced relocation is a major problem in the third world, the developing world. It has not occurred in the first world in the last 60 years, except here on the Navajo Nation. So there is not a other forced relocation community in any advanced, developed, high-income democracy except America, and it's none in America except here in Sanders. So we'll get to Sanders. The forced relocation actually involves quite a bit of the Navajo Nation and border towns beyond Sanders, but the Sanders becomes the focus over time. So it actually goes back to 1865. I've divided it into a few blocks at a time, and I plan to only spend 30 minutes talking about this background, and then spend 30 minutes trying to see where do we go from here as providers. The first relocation, forced relocation, is the classic forced relocation as it occurs now in the third world. The central government decides, usually because they want to protect business interests, to clear out. I don't know if you want to do that, do we?
Postpone.
They want to clear out an area of indigenous people, usually, or poor people, and remove them so that business interests can exploit resources in a land area that is currently controlled by an indigenous population. At the end of the Civil War, when there was enough soldiers available, business interests said, well, you know, those Navajos have very nice land, and so we would like that for the larger community. So they send a force of soldiers, gather up 8,000 Navajo, and force them to walk 450 miles in 18 days with major loss of life. That is the Long Walk Wikipedia article, and the Long Walk is quick and very clear discussion of it as a forced relocation. So here the government pays no attention to the rights of the people. There's no legal activity. They just send the soldiers, gather the folks up, move them to a concentration camp. In this case, the concentration camp was in New Mexico. The Navajos stayed there for 4 years. Business interests carefully looked at what is now the Navajo Nation, decided it was useless, and moved the Navajo back on foot to Fort Defiance. That was 4 years after the initial forced relocation. So by the end of the 1860s, the Navajo are back here in Fort Defiance and then spread out from here. There's a lot of detail that goes between 1865 and 1945, but I'm going to fast forward to 1945 to 1973. So, for a long time, the Navajos spread throughout their lands with the sheep and pastoral subsistence economy and their own language and culture. And this spreads to a pretty large area. The federal government agrees to this. They completely surround the Hopi tribe. Hopi tribe is in the center and a little worried. And in the late 1800s, a president draws a big box in the center of the Navajo Nation and says, you know, the Hopi and any other Indians agreed to by the Secretary of the Interior can use the big box. It's not a Hopi reservation, it's a native land. It was really to stop low-level issues that were brought in by the larger community, mainly issues around educating Hopis, which Hopis were against. So they draw this box. They just don't pay any attention really to who's where or anything. And this is a one-paragraph letter from a president that creates this box, which goes on to become a major issue. So that happens before 1945. The war ends, and there are now energy available for exploiting natural resources. And in that time period, the largest surface deposit of coal in the world has been discovered in the northern part of land that is shared by the Navajo and the Hopi. There's no doubt that the coal, 20 billion tons of coal, a mesa native coal, black mesa, is native coal. That there's no issue about. But at this time, there are no tribal councils. There are all kinds of issues of who owns what, who can sign a lease. And large business interests, very large. Major coal company, largest in the world, largest private coal company, largest oil company, now ExxonMobil, largest power generating company, Edison Electric, say, largest pile of coal, we would like that coal. And despite the fact that they ceded all this land back to the Navajo at the end of the first forced relocation, they say, well, we want the coal at the absolute cheapest price, for free if possible. And they begin in the late 40s to plan to exploit this coal, and there are all kinds of difficulties. The world has changed so much between the first forced relocation and the second that they feel, well, you know, we can't just go in there with soldiers anymore. We need to have a strategy. There are references for all of this, which I will share at the end. I just don't want people. So instead of sending in Kit Carson, they decide to send in the modern form, attorneys. And this gentleman, Littell, he in the late 40s comes, he applies to the Navajo Nation. He was the Assistant Attorney General for the whole United States. John Sterling Boyden, however, also applies. He was the State Attorney General for Utah. So they're very experienced lawyers and they want the money. Littell, he seemed to me a pretty ethical man. He wants to try and keep the Navajos in the line of getting the most money they can for coal, and he's actually working for the tribe. This gentleman is the reason attorneys are not highly respected. He represents himself as working for the Hopi, and through the whole time period that I just illustrated, from 1945 to 1973, he is seen by the Hopi, the Navajo, the larger community, as the lawyer for the Hopi. In fact, he was on the payroll of the coal company, the oil company, and power generating company, and he worked for the Morgan Bank. All of these forces want the coal at the cheapest price, and they want it to make electricity, and they know that they're going to make literally hundreds of billions. And so he's going back and forth between Hopi Land, the first Mesa, second Mesa, and he has a base in Salt Lake City. He has a big public relations firm. He has lobbyists. He's also going to Washington. He's making personal friends with any legislator who sees it his way. He captures entirely the Hopi Tribal Council, which he forms. Of only 12 Hopi, he's a Mormon man. All 12 chose to become Mormons. And they chose to see it his way. He got the first check. I'm going to give all the numbers in current dollars. First check in the mid-1950s for $5 million. He got the second check 10 years later for he got $5 million the first time, $10 million the second time. So he already had made $10 million, $15 million.
Oh,
What did he get it for? He advocated land claim first for the Hopi. He did a land claim suit. Federal government paid the $5 million in current dollars. Then later, he negotiated the first oil leases and got his $10 million check. The Hopi, by the way, got 10 times that, and they began to see this gentleman as a very favorable guy. Not all Hopi, by far. Traditional Hopis never liked him, rejected him. A very tiny minority of the Hopi community ever agreed that the tribal council represented them. This was a puppet tribal council that represented oil, coal, electricity, and construction. So, but he's a double agent, and he is not seen by anyone as having this role. And behind him, he has huge support. 23 utilities are supporting him. Millions, tons of dollars. He's going all over the country. He trains some Hopi guys to go around with him and give talks. He has the speeches written by lawyers, public relations people, and lobbyists. He's making friends all over the country to see this issue in the way that will get the companies to coal for as close to nothing as possible. And over this time period, to become a conflict between ExxonMobil on one side and Grandma and Grandpa Begay with their sheep on the other. The folks that are trying to hold on to their land, very simple people living out there. Can I make this stop?
can you just change the time frame?
I'll do it.
Okay. The folks who are trying to protect their land are very simple, very humble people. The Navajo tribal lawyer, the Tell, he's playing it by the book. You say, oh, the Navajo have been here for 1,000 years. They were here before the first forced relocation. The Hopi are stuck on these little mesas down here. It's 150 miles to the mine. Why is it that you want to, kick out the people? Why is it that you want to divide the land into Hopi land and Navajo land? These are native people who can, work together. This is a huge economic resource for them. And I think Littell was a good guy, really. He was, though politically naive, and he, I don't think, realized how carefully and thoroughly Boyden was planning to shift this to a really theft of the coal from the native people. So I just put this up only to show how simple the folks were who are trying to defend themselves. They're out in the middle of no place. They are Navajo speaker only, no lawyer, no lobbyist, no nothing, no money for campaign contribution. And in the background, they're getting really screwed. You can see the police standing here. There's as things are going along, it's getting worse and worse. By 1960, Littell and Boyden face each other in a courtroom in Prescott, Arizona, and You know, really, Littell is very logical, arguing the case. The Navajos have lived here. The sheep are on top of the coal. That's our coal. And Boyden is saying, no, no. There are good Indians and bad Indians. I represent the good Indians. Good Indians stay on the top of a mesa, have religious things, very nice people. Bad Indians, they're marauding, violent Navajo Indians. And he begins to create, and he has been working on this since the 40s, it's well documented, the image of the Navajo as a lethal threat to the Hopi. This is completely cooked and is being worked out, I believe, by the oil and gas industry, oil and coal, electricity folks, to create now a propaganda campaign that will now keep rolling. The trial goes along, it's a long trial, 8 days, tons of stuff, lots of detail. At the end of it, the court says, half the land is the Hopis, half the land is the Navajo, but we cannot rule on which half is which half. You guys have to decide together. But really, the weight, this decision is moving in the direction of having the natives kicked off this land. And is really a devastating defeat for the Navajo. Things are already looking bad. So at the end of this trial, Boyden negotiates with Littell, and they agree to lease the coal for 35 years, 20 billion tons. The Navajo will get 15 cents a ton. The Hopi will get 15 cents a ton. All the rest of the money will go to coal, electricity company, construction company, power company. So it's about less than 1/10% of the money is going to come to natives. So the plan that Boyden had is already working, and he already has captured a lot. But the theory at this time, this is 1966, world's largest coal mine. Under that coal is thought to be vast oil supplies. And so ExxonMobil and multiple other oil companies are funding, continue to try and clear as much of the land as possible of natives so that they can exploit the oil, natural gas, uranium that is thought to be associated with the huge coal deposit. This gentleman is the chairman, whose name I can't say.
Albert Sikierewstua. Yeah, Albert Sikierewstua.
He and his predecessor, two Hopi men, flown all over the country, put in a suit, given their speeches by lobbyists and public relations people, representing themselves as at lethal risk from Navajo. This is Senator DeConcini and Tribal Chairman Peter McDonald. This is becoming very highly political by this time because the Navajo can see forced relocation in the future. They realize if the land gets divided, their people are going to get kicked off in large numbers, around 10,000 people. But Boyden, he's just grinding away in the background, building this massive campaign to push through a law that will partition the land and kick the Navajo out. Very big politicians become involved. Barry Goldwater, running for president in 1964, becomes the Senate advocate for partition and forced relocation. Morris Udall from Colorado, and Aspinall, another congressman, become the House advocates. Their campaigns are completely financed by the interests who are going to want the coal and the other resources as close to for free as possible. So there's no democracy here at all. It's completely now happening in the background. There's the court cases, of which there are dozens, are almost foregone conclusions. The Navajo see the BIA as the enemy. They say BIA forced relocation program treats us like animals. This is a 1982 image from demonstrations saying the forced relocation is cruel. it's oppressive, but this is the level of action of the people to defend themselves, while Boyden is running this giant campaign in the background. And the outcome becomes pretty obvious. In 1973, Goldwater puts through a bill, Udall puts through a bill. They're punishing terrible bills. In the beginning, they said they would force relocate all 10,000 Navajo, give them absolutely nothing, just kick them out. They said they are a lethal threat to the Hopi. They need to be kicked out. And they are fought by almost no one. There's almost no debate in Congress. Some people say, you know, oh, this is just too harsh. So they say, well, we'll give them 50,000 for a house one time. And that's this bill. It's only 10 pages long. Forced relocation, it's the partition and forced relocation bill, first in the Senate. Senate voted unanimously to pass this bill. No debate whatsoever. No newspaper covered the transaction. No big newspaper has ever covered any aspect of the forced relocation, I think because of who's behind the issue. Now the bill's through. Now they just want to move. Now they just want to move natives. They developed this thing called the Relocation Commission. This is one page. This is the A's and B's list of who they're going to force relocate. They make a detailed list. We're going to just take these folks. So here are the Hopi up on the Masons. Here's the mine. The mine actually is a lot on the Navajo Nation, but it is theorized that there's a lot of other resources in this part, and this is what they want. So they're shooting for this area. The Navajo are populating all this area, all down in here, and the Hopis say, well, you know, we'll get killed if we don't get rid of Grandma Begay and her sheep, so you got to kick them out. Just to illustrate, the Navajo Tribal Council is working in the background all the time, really hard. Peter McDonald, Tribal Chairman, 1981, he's writing to the Relocation Commission. He says, how does one plan for misery? How does one plan for the destruction of one's culture? These are real and fundamental problems presented by relocation. So the Navajo are very clearly seeing this as a human rights abuse. It's 1981. The human rights community really is very weak. It's totally powerless inside the U.S. And so this is just rolling along. So this is protest, but it's going no place. So now, by the early 80s, we're looking at 10,000 Navajo are going to get kicked out. They're going to get given 50,000 if they pick a place to build a house. All they get is the 50,000 for the house. The whole family gets that 50,000. So they take the whole family from the hinterland, Navajo speakers, they slaughter their sheep, they bulldoze down their house, and they move them to a place like Flagstaff or Winslow or Gallup. Sanders hasn't even come into the picture yet. And they give them a house, but they have no money, no cash money. So they hold on to the house usually for a few months, maybe a year. Then they try to borrow against it. They can't pay the mortgage money, and the house is repossessed, and they're homeless. And this is the first wave of forced relocation. So now the Navajo say, well, you know, this is obviously terrible. It's cruel. The people are getting killed, sick, miserable, homeless, impoverished. Let's try to repeal or at least soften the first bill. So they commissioned this guy, Thayer Scudder, to do a study of the medical effects of forced relocation. And this guy does, it's a hefty study. It is over 200 pages. It is hard to find. There are 3 copies in the Southwest. And it is entirely commissioned by the Navajo Nation. It is designed to illustrate how bad, how much of a pathogen is forced relocation. And what the guy does, he is an anthropologist from California Institute of Technology. He's been all over the world looking at forced relocation as an issue. Aswan Dam in Egypt, places in Southeast Asia, and he has been the primary investigator. He comes here and he looks at the people who were in the first wave of forced relocation. He says, well, if we knew in detail what happened to these folks, we could predict what might happen to the 10,000 that will come after them. And they tracked down 100 forced relocatee families from the early phase being pushed into the border towns. And they detail interview them, systematic interview in Navajo. They put it into computers and stuff. They do careful analysis. They track what happened to them. And they find that so it's 100% sample. There's no bias. You just hunt down anybody they can who's been relocated. 5-year mortality for the initial forced relocation wave is 25%. So it's like you gave breast cancer to every single person, and they are in very bad shape. This is a devastating event. The interviews show that the Navajo were experiencing this. You lose your land among the Navajo at this period of time, I think still, it is a very big deal. You lose all your sheep. You lose all, and they were losing 25 square miles per family, 25 to 50 square miles. It was replaced with 1/4 acre and this $50,000 tract house with no money to hold on to it. Nothing for learn English, nothing for gain a skill, nothing for counseling, nothing for health care. Just pure craziness. Very devastating. The people became severely depressed. They became severely anxious. And this was the whole family all at once. Every generation, because they were living in what they call groups of, they can call it units or something. Extended homes. And so everybody you knew, your mother, your father, sister, brother, aunts, uncles, kids, everybody would be forced relocated at once. So there was no support system for you to turn to. The Navajos who were left in the other areas were already maxed out. They didn't have any room for these people on their sheep. They said, you know, we'd like to take you, but it would kill us too, so I'm sorry, you're going to Flag, you're going to Winslow. And there they found nothing. So they, suicide, homicide, car accidents, lethal levels of alcoholism were the outcome. And Scudder and his team, the mental health utilization was 8 times average comparing Navajo forced relocatees to other Navajo. So the mental health power was very clear. He, being an anthropologist, and all the people that he worked with were either psychologists. There was one psychologist from IHS, no doctor, no mid-level. There was one nurse, Navajo nurse. She was working as an administrator by that time, but not for like a foundation or something. No Indian Health Service contribution as an organization, no physician or mid-level contribution to this, and this is the only study I can identify. The presentation is excellent, it's very scientific. Navajos made it clear though, this is like having your heart torn out while you're still living. And this recurs independently from multiple interviews as a model, as an image for what forced relocation is like. This whole thing was entered into the congressional record multiple times. It was delivered to the key senators. They delivered it to Senator Goldwater, and he said, I don't see it this way. This is biased and useless, and this is the biggest opportunity that will occur in these people's life. And he writes that in a letter to other senators to gain support for continuing the forced relocation. This is the kind of thing that folks were up against. They compare the data to 25 studies from around the world. Forced relocation universally produces this kind of morbidity, mortality. Scudder, his group, the Navajos, their advocates say, look, you're killing the folks, you're damaging the folks, you need to do more for them. So they say, okay, we'll give you Sanders. It's sad. And that's how Sanders comes to, into being. The Relocation Commissioners, say, well, where are we going to put these folks and just help them out a whole lot. So they look around, they look at different places, and so there's been a nuclear accident. A uranium mine leaked a bunch of uranium waste into the Puerto River, damaging the whole ecosystem down there around Sanders. The land got cheap, and so they said, well, we'll buy you 250,000 acres down around this wonderful town, right near an interstate. Railroad goes through it. There are 7 bars there, so folks won't go thirsty. And we will make you a little town for the forced relocatees. This is now, we're up to 1985, and the Congress. This, obviously biased and useless. The propaganda that Boyden has been working on since 1947, the Navajo are a lethal threat to the Hopi, that is solid stuff, very well documented. So the these totally unsubstantiated allegations, lawyers, lobbyists, public relations company, all completely, and well, the references, I'm going to hand them out. This guy, John Redhouse, Navajo activist, he's still living up in Farmington area. He writes a monograph, 1983, linking and showing the campaign contributions, the backroom deals, the smoke and mirrors, the lies, names of the names. Like, for example, the Assistant Secretary of the Interior, during the year that they're moving toward the 1973 forced location law, works almost nonstop on this bill. Assistant Secretary of the Interior, second lowest person in that department. Navajo people say, advocates say, we've never seen a government employee work so hard on anything. What is going on? At the end of the year, the man becomes the Vice President of Peabody Coal. Leaves the Assistant Secretary of the Interior. The next day, he's the Vice President for Political Affairs of Peabody Coal. Now, people say, I don't see the evidence that the 1% were influencing government and controlling this process. Like, what would they need? So the many Navajos were against the forced relocation. They fought it consistently. Unfortunately, I can say no providers yet have fought. Many efforts to repeal the forced relocation law, 1985, 2006. I see no evidence of even any support from providers or IHS, no medical studies. After Scudder's study, ending in 1982, he advocated, he said, really, this is like an experiment here. You're going to force relocate pastoral, native people, living traditional, into the larger culture. I predict it will be lethal. I think you should track this, look at the initial results, and really rethink what you're doing. They said, hey, we're giving the guys Sanders, and therefore we don't have to do any of that because no bad things will happen. I mean, how blatant can we get? It should obviously have been fought. No writings, no studies. After Scudder, Indian Health Service never studies it. Nobody ever looks at what happened to the folks. They're all easily tracked. They'd spent $2 billion federal money to do the forced relocation. They didn't study any aspect of its health effect. Down in Sanders today, they built a little clinic. Many of you have been there. That was built in 1985 with forced relocation dollars. Gallup Indian Hospital service unit was given the responsibility to staff it. They fail. Most of the time the thing has stood there. Sometimes it's at a mid-level. Occasionally it's at a doctor. But really, I think until 9 months ago, 10 months ago, when I started going down there 3 days a week, there's not been consistent primary care presence in that clinic. The mid-levels have come and gone. There never has been a counselor, never had a mental health counselor. 8 times the need, none at all. No social worker, no case manager, no transportation between Gallup and the clinic. And these folks are super poor. I mean, when they get forced relocated and they get the $50,000 house and nothing, they then try to go on Social Security disability. It's the only cash flow that they can access. They then, you know, one person out of the family is on Social Security. They have 10 people and $300 a month. When they say they do not have the money to come up here, they are serious. Because there was, no, you know, people think maybe, oh, there's a lot of welfare put in there for the folks when they got forced relocated. Not $1. Once they lost the house, they had absolutely nothing. So, where we're at, the TMC, once 638 became Navajo Hospital, and service unit reaches out, tries to help. I think Dr. Lisa went down there for a long time before that was the case. She went down, but she only went down 1 or 2 days a month during maybe last 10 years to do some peds down there. Finally, stuff starts to happen, and at this point in time, there is activity. Dr. Tutt, Dr. Reese, Dr. Leister, Dr. John Lambert from PEDS have contributed. Marlene Ariacho has been the clinic director, Navajo lady. Board member Sosi has been helpful at the board level to try and advocate for the Sanders Clinic. But really now the Sanders Clinic, we serve 75% of our effort goes to not forced relocatees. 75% of our effort goes toward taking care of people who live near that clinic. Maybe 25% is to the 1,200 Navajo survivors of forced relocation who live down there. 25,000 are spread over the border towns. That's the estimate in 2006 by Navajos. The thing is still going. Near our clinic, there's a building that says Office of Indian Relocation. I figured it was like a historical artifact or something left over from the Dark Ages. I go in there, the lady says, oh, no, we're still bringing in, we're going to bring in 100 families. We're processing 100 families right now. So the forced relocation is not a historical event. It is continuing to go on. There's an office in Flag, there's an office in Sanders, there may be other offices. There's a big office back in Washington, D.C. Sad superlatives of the forced relocation. For the last 60 years, in a high per capita income democracy anywhere in the world, this is the longest forced relocation at 60 years, most expensive at $2 billion, most person years. I figure 600,000 person years of forced relocation survival. The Japanese internment is our other big one. That was 100,000 for 3 years, so 300,000 person years. So this is double our next closest. U.S. is the only first world nation that has ever done this. The little tiny ones up in Canada, 300 people at a time, this kind of thing. Australia didn't do it. New Zealand didn't do it to the Maoris. Most lethal, undoubtedly. If anything close to that mortality rate persisted, and of course, I first became interested in Sanders when we had the TB epidemic of the winter of 2011-12, when we had sometimes 2 and 3 people in here with active TB, and a lot of them came from Sanders. Is that right, Mike? No. So it's still a major pathogen. It is that little community of forced relocatees survivors, 1,200 of them in Sanders. It's the only place in the first world where there is a community of forced relocatees. So, from a just uniqueness standpoint, we have the opportunity to make a contribution to a uniquely punished group of folks. There are really two separate projects. There's the clinic, which serves that whole area, has to be open very much to any native, serves Zuni, serves Hopi, serves all the communities. Sanders is 30 miles from anything, and halfway around that radius, the folks are going to logically come to the clinic. And as the clinic improves, more and more people come, and the amount of effort of the clinic to the forced relocatee survivors is diluted. We have a social worker. We've had the social worker now. So it's been there since 1985. We've had a 1 week of social worker. We don't yet have a counselor. The building's there. The tribe has designated some folks to go down there, but they have not given them enough money, so they have a phone, a fax machine, connection to the larger world, so they have not started to do any counseling. 1985 to the present, no counseling. And then the second is the forced relocation survivor population. This group, I'm sure we see them every day. They're not identified. So the 25,000, that's the directly affected, either forced relocated themselves, or a spouse or a child of a forced relocatee. This affects the whole Navajo Nation, there's no doubt. At the time of the first forced relocation, 10,000 Navajo being forced relocated was 10% of the total Navajo population being forced relocated. Think about if we were not powerful enough to resist it, if Al-Qaeda could force relocate 30 million people out of the U.S., it would affect the rest of the nation. So this was a major event. And that's the background. And I figured, the reference. I put together just the top ones, and you want to pass around. And I photocopied the No Place to Go because you have to interlibrary loan it. There are 3 copies available from Amazon. It is the only scientific study. I think it clearly shows that it's a severely pathogenic process or entity. So the data is there. One of the references there, can I stick with me for a little bit? One of the references, the effort that the Navajo people have made to get the recognition that this is illegal, oppressive, forced relocation is just dramatic. They've been to Geneva, Switzerland multiple times. They go to the UN, they push through the stuff. Look at number 4 there. United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, October 2007, clearly shows all the different, like 5 different places where indigenous people's rights were violated by this process. In August of 12, they got a paragraph in saying forced relocation, illegal, human rights abuse, but despite all that, they never have been able to get any reparation, compensation. The Japanese internment folks in mid-1990s got $2 billion for having been forced relocated for 3 years and then back to their home. These folks, 60 years, can't go back, not a dime. So one aspect of the misery is that, the fig leaf of giving the folks a house was just useless. It was no help at all. The 250,000 acres of radioactive land, it never worked as a place. There's no sheep out there on that land. No one down there does the old way. They might live in Hogan, but they don't have the sheep. That whole thing was just destroyed by the forced relocation. So, and the fact that sitting in Flagstaff is a list of every single forced relocatee. Name, date of birth, social security number, and where they went. No one has taken that database and said, how lethal, how much illness, how bad was it? To me, this cries out for a study that say Scudder predicted it based on the first wave. What happened? It could be, in comparison with what's been spent so far, is nothing. And the coal, so Boyden successfully captured the coal. Less than 0.1% of the money coming to Navajo. The coal was moved to big power plants by either rail or water that destroyed the water for this whole center. The aquifer for this whole area was sucked dry by water they used to pump the coal over to a power plant, 600 tons an hour. The interest to back Boyden, big companies still exist, made, I estimate, $500 billion at least on taking the coal, taking it to power plants, turning it to electricity and selling it. Of that $500 billion, almost nothing came back to the Navajo Nation, certainly nothing to the forced relocatees. So the clarity of the abuse and the complete lack of regard for the rights of the indigenous is just glaring, super documented. 12 federal cases, 2 Supreme Court cases, 2 rounds of federal legislation, during which time they documented all this stuff. And I think because the internet wasn't there and investigative reporting wasn't what it was today, they just did, you know, obvious, blatant influence peddling. The Navajos have sued them successfully, but only for small dollars. But that's the politics of it. It interests some people like me, but it's not explicitly medical. The medical component to me is grossly obvious. I mean, we know that an enormous burden of morbidity was created by the federal government. It seems logical to me, if you're going to make the people 10 times sicker, you should give them 10 times the resources. They gave nothing. There no health project has ever been done, to my knowledge. Is that, Mike, have you ever heard of one? So nothing has been done. It seems logical that in view of how blatant and how sloppy and aggressive it is, that a thoughtful and medical approach backed by people who can couch their request in the framework of purely medical issue might well be funded.